Welcome to this episode of the Best Hopes podcast. My name is Adam Thrower.
And I'm Cecil Walker.
Today we are going to walk through another synonym. I kind of talk about it as the slice of the pie. Another slice of the pie of hope. And the slice that we're going to be talking about today is intention. And just for frame of reference, some of the synonyms that go along with that idea of intention are the bottom line, the end goal, the nature of something, the object of something, the plan, or the target. So, Cecil, in true Best Hopes fashion, as you hear about these terms, what stands out to you or what comes to your mind as you think about hope in this context?
My first thought is I think we need a new formula for how we get started in this.
Well, you can keep hoping for that. That could be your end goal.
Hope really hard, yeah. That's my intention. I think looking at it from the angle of intention starts to really reveal to me how, I kind of want to say, it makes hope feel less of like it's optional. It feels like I need that then, because I don't know many people who would say they want to live unintentionally or they want to proceed in a thing unintentionally. I think if anyone, I'm assuming this, maybe I'm just projecting my own perspective, so I'll speak for myself. I don't want to engage in something unintentionally, and if I have the awareness and the choice to have more intention, that's always going to be what I want. And I feel like I'm missing out on something if I've gone about it in an unintentional way. And so when I think of hope as it relates to intention or as a facet of intention, it makes me think the similar thing, that why would I go down a path? Why would I engage with something? Why would I try my hand at something without hope if it's going to mean that I'm being less intentional about that thing or I have less of some idea of how I want that thing to go or the purpose behind why I'm doing that thing? So it starts to kind of mold all of that together for me. It starts to feel like, well, if it's something that's worth doing, then it's something that's worth having intention / hope. And ironically, I think that kind of makes us be more intentional about the things that we make a plan for, the things that we want to set our ambitions on.
It's really good. I have several thoughts, so I'll try to whittle it down and then we can probably get to some of the others as well. But I really like the distinction that you talked about as far as like moving with intention, being purposeful about something, because as you were talking, what came to my mind is that when we make it, I'm going to try my best to describe this, but we oftentimes say, I intend to do something. And oftentimes that intention, if I don't follow through with the intention, it turns into procrastination, or it turns it like, and we say like, oh, well, I intended to do that. It was my well wish to do that, but other things came up or took priority or whatever. And I think that when we put these other words to it, it really takes out the excuse. It's the end goal. It's the target. It's the plan. It's there's so much definitiveness about like, I'm going to move in this direction. It's not just empty promises. It's not just like, I think oftentimes we talk about it as like false hope or something like that. And I think that what you're getting at is really like, not only do I intend to do it, but there is a plan, there is effort that's going into this. And the way that you used the word intention was it's active. It's not just something I'm hoping for, but it's that hope is backed by action.
Yeah. And you did something really helpful there where you kind of zoomed in on how it's useful in that as we move through the experiences we move through, as we move through the whatever journey that we're on towards something, we're not only going to judge our quote success by did we create the outcome that we intended on in the first place? Is the thing we're hoping for, did that become true 100% according to how we described it when we set out? Because I think it's valuable to have that hope and to have that intention, and it makes a difference even if the outcome in reality turns out to be slightly different. And it's the same for therapy too. When people come and they say, I want to feel less depressed, and instead of depressed, I want to feel so motivated that I clean my whole home, I take all this time for friends. I, work on this hobby. I am all these things. And even as we talk about that as that's the thing that we're working towards, that's the thing we have intention for, they'll find that they're so much more pleased with their lives, even if they never get to any of those things on the list. Their house might still be a dump and they still feel like, oh, I'm living as a better version of myself. Me experiencing this moment right now is still far better than before I had these intentions, even if the literal plan or outcome that I had isn't what came into fruition. I think it has an effect on us just by holding that as that's my intention, that's the direction I want to go in.
So we're so far into, the slices of the pie that I think it might also be good for us to not revisit some of the previous slices of the pie, but to kind of also make some distinctions. And I'm going to ask you a really hard question.
Great.
One of the very first, we did a couple of introductory episodes, and then one of the first episodes that we talked about as far as getting into, the synonyms and kind of really concretizing hope was an episode on ambition. And we talked about ambition as the aspiration, the dream, and purpose also came up in that discussion around hope as an ambition. We've touched on kind of the purpose, and I think purpose is embedded in like the end goal or the bottom line or those kinds of things. And so how do you see this iteration of hope, the intention, as either overlapping or distinct from ambition and purpose in that sense?
Well, I think it makes sense that a lot of these are going to leak over onto each other because we are like narrowing in onto this one concept of hope from different angles. And so I think it totally makes sense that those things might overlap. And I think obviously this overlaps in that sense of purpose with ambition. When you say, I want to be this kind of a person, or I want to get to this place, I could see that ambition and that intention being very similar in that this is what I'm setting out for. This is what I want for myself. But the distinction I see, at least in my own interpretation of this, the distinction I see is that it is about meaning, but it's not so much about the ambition of it. It's about the intent feels so much more concrete to me. If I say I intend for this thing, or I have this intention, or I went about this in an intentional way, it sounds more like those words, those synonyms that you listed off. It sounds like a plan. It sounds like an outcome. It sounds like, this is, I don't want to use the word design because I think that takes us into a different word, but I've sat down and thought about here's what I want. Here's who I want to be. I put some intentionality into this thing. What I think of is when I was younger, my piano teacher, she was my piano teacher from the time I was in 4th or 5th grade. I graduated high school. And she would say all the time, don't play anything just by the way. She was from Russia, born and raised, and so sometimes her English was a little clunky, but she was saying, don't play anything unintentionally. Don't play something and it just sounds like I just played it to play the right notes and I had no purpose or meaning or anything behind that. And that's what I think of when I think of intention, is that it sounds different when someone's playing something intentionally, like they had some intention behind how they played it and why they played it and all those things. And I think the exact same thing is true about any of the things we're pursuing in our life. It looks different. It comes out different. You show up different. It affects you differently when there's intention behind it. And I, with absolute certainty, would say everything is better with more intention. I want to live in a house that was built intentionally. I want all the things in that house to be placed there in an intentional manner. I want everything to work and function because of the intention that went into those things. So yeah, I think it feels more real, more concrete, more functional when I think about intention versus ambition.
Yeah, I think one of the things as you're talking, a distinction that's becoming clear, I think, is ambition is that like big dream, right? Mm-hmm. It's something that I am shooting for. It's maybe even something ideal. Mm-hmm. Whereas intention is almost, as I hear you talking about it, it's almost the why. Why do you want that big dream? What are you willing to invest in achieving that big dream? And I can see how purpose really aligns both of those, that if you're acting purposefully, if you're acting intentionally, then you're doing these things in order to achieve that big hoped for dream. and they align. The means and the end align with
Mhm.
each other. And I feel like with intention, we're talking about the means. I'm acting with hope. I'm acting with intention. I don't know if it's going to pan out to get me to that ultimate big aspiration, but I'm acting intentionally with the hope that it will get me there. And I think that we need both parts of hope. We need to understand why we're doing what we're doing. We need to intentionally put effort into achieving something that we want. And that takes some unknowing, right? Like, I don't know if this is going to pay off, but I have hope that this is going to pay off. I'm doing this on purpose to achieve that, but the end is uncertain. And it takes hope to even envision the end goal, to envision what I'm aspiring to. And so I love the idea of hope being the means to the end and also the end. It really becomes all encompassing that we maybe need different versions of hope at different places along our journey.
That makes me, I think you're the perfect person to ask this question too, because you're the most intentional person I probably know. But that makes me think, if someone is looking at that or hearing this conversation and thinking, oh, that does sound useful, or it sounds like that makes sense, and I want to capture some of that and use some of that. How does someone become more intentional? How do you start to pursue something in a way that says, I'm being intentional about this thing? And does that look different from person to person?
I mean, I guess I can only answer from my own perspective, but I think it probably does vary from person to person. I think about, and how this connects to like intention, is I love the idea of the bottom line. Oftentimes we talk about the bottom line in the realm of finance, right? And it's like, well, what's the bottom line? Like, how much is this going to cost? How much is, like, what am I going to invest in this? What's the bottom line? And we think about that. We weigh it as, is the money that I put into this worth what I'm going to get out of this? Yeah. And I think that same concept applies when we're trying to become really intentional. We have to think, okay, I'm going to have to sacrifice some things. If I choose to do this, I'm going to have to give up that. Some easy examples, right? If I want to be more healthy, I have to be intentional about eating certain foods, and that inherently means then I can't eat other foods. So I'm going to give up one. The bottom line is sacrifice of potentially things you like, invest in some things maybe you don't like as much. If we talk about that, then in exercise, I have to maybe get up earlier in order to work out. I have to put in sweat equity, we call it, right? I have to invest energy. I have to invest time. The bottom line is that sweat equity, but it also is I give up a little bit of sleep, or I stay up a bit later because I don't have time to work out until the end of the day. And so again, the same sweat equity goes in. Maybe I'm still sacrificing the same sleep, but it comes at the beginning of the night instead of at the end of the night. I think similarly, right, when we pursue something like education, I give up time when I sit in class. I have to make the decision, do I want to put in effort, work in order to become, to study, to read, to master the content of this, or do I want to go spend some time with my friends? The bottom line is you have a limited amount of time. You have to decide how you're going to spend that time. And so I think, how do you become more intentional? You have to be really, really, really realistic and think, okay, what is the bottom line? Am I willing to pay the bottom line? Are there places where I can scrimp? Are there places where I can maybe not have to scrimp so much? I can get some rest or relaxation somewhere else. So I think having a realistic perspective, that's, I think, a first thing. You can't be intentional if you don't know why you're being intentional. And then I think it really comes down to practice. I don't know how to say it differently, but I think practice turns into consistency. And in order to be intentional, I think it has to become consistent. But we're not automatically consistent. We practice becoming consistent. And so we set our intention each day to say, okay, today I'm going to do this in line. There's that word, right? In line with the bottom line again. And so I think it's not something that I think knowing the bottom line is important, but the bottom line doesn't help us day to day. I think it's that we then say, do I recommit to the bottom line again today? I think it is seeing the big picture, but it's also breaking it down day by day and saying, am I committed to that today?
Yeah, it very much sounds like the act of being intentional is knowing that bottom line, of course, and then proceeding in a way that you're constantly affirming that bottom line. You have to rearrange the way that you live and the way that you go through these different moments of your life that allow you to still be in connection with that bottom line, to say that I'm doing this for that reason. My why is still kind of pulling me through this thing. I could explain why I've done these things in this certain way, or why I made the choices that I made according to that bottom line, if I'm doing these things intentionally. And I think that actually starts to kind of explain some of the major differences between how different people live different lives, is they very likely have different bottom lines. They have different intentions. Maybe they're hoping for different kinds of outcomes for themselves. And for that same reason, there are different scales of measurement for how much success those individuals might be having. But I think on an individual basis for themselves, they could say, I'm this close to the outcome that I want based on how well I've rearranged what I'm doing, how well I've stuck to my commitment to this thing that I said that's important. Do you have, I guess, an idea of, if something feels important to someone, how do you, maybe this is a motivational question, how do you get yourself to stay committed to that thing?
I think that's a good question. I think it comes down to, I guess the word that I would use is appreciation or gratitude. I don't know if this is going to be a hard thing to describe, but I would say in pursuit, in being intentional, in striving for something, taking stock of movement in that direction, and then being grateful for those small movements. I think it becomes a self-perpetuating experience if I take a small step forward and then I think, man, I'm so glad that I was able to accomplish that. I'm so glad that I could achieve that. Just noticing difference, noticing improvement, and then taking stock of that took work, that took effort. I'm amazed almost at myself that I was able to do that. It then becomes self-perpetuating because you feel like, man, if I could do that, imagine if I just did a little bit more. I think one of the things that I think oftentimes is the opposite, I guess, of intentionality is overwhelm, where it just feels like everything is coming, everything is piling on, everything is, and it's like, I can't get to in being intentional because I just feel completely overwhelmed. And I think that when we break down the steps into tiny little bits, right? We take the big end goal and we say, okay, first step is this, second step is this. If I achieve the first step, I can be grateful. It reduces the sense of overwhelm. It gives me motivation. Okay, well, if I could do step one, I guess I can move on and try to do step two. And then I get to step two and I feel grateful that I was able to do that. Gratitude is a way of, it's almost like the check of like, okay, that part's done. I have to feel less overwhelmed. I can feel more intentional. I can feel more motivated. So I think gratitude, and the smaller we can make gratitude, the more helpful it is along the way.
Yeah, it's like check and balance type of thing that helps guide you as you're moving through in trying to be in tangent with, your bottom line. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on this. I sometimes think of, if intentionality is me doing things with purpose, me doing things with a sense of, I know my why, and that's allowed me to make certain choices and to stick to certain commitments. It makes me think the opposite of that, though. A lack of intention is maybe I didn't yet choose my why. Maybe I didn't yet find some sense of purpose. Or maybe I'm doing things by accident. Maybe I'm doing things mindlessly, or didn't think to stop and make a choice about how I approach this type of thing. And I feel like, that very much reminds me of, I'm sure we've probably talked about this, but the number one thing that I use kind of assess when I've watched a movie or even like read a book or something or listened to a song, but it usually really comes to mind for movies, is how intentional did it feel? Because everything in a movie is fabricated. Every sound you hear, someone had to make a choice for you to hear that sound, whether that's music or that's sound effects or that's someone speaking. Everything you see on screen, these aren't real places most of the time. Sometimes they're real locations, but even if they are real locations, anything that the camera catches, someone had to make a choice about, I want that thing to be caught by the camera. And that could be a book in the background, or that could be a trash can, or, the clothes that the people are wearing, anything. There were choices that were made. And if it feels like those choices have no purpose, or there's no why behind it, or it doesn't make sense, it feels too accidental, too unfunctional, that starts to kind of spell together for me that this movie might not be that great. There wasn't enough intention or direction. There wasn't enough of here's why we did the things that we did. Here's the message we want to send. Here's the picture we want to kind of sculpt together. And I would think the same about if I were living my life in that kind of a way. It feels like there's not enough intention, and it feels like this is being done less skillfully. This is being done in a way that isn't matching up to the full potential of what it could be. Because I imagine, a movie director, they all want to make a good movie. So you don't reach your full potential if you're not doing things with all the intention that you could.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful analogy, because I think what it does is it shows all of those little tiny intentional decisions come together to create something really meaningful. And I think that the word of creation, we oftentimes think of like our hope. Again, I'll go back to that one of those first episodes around ambition. We think of it as like this big nebulous thing out there. And I think intentionality brings it to a place of we're creating that thing that we're hoping for. It's not just passively sitting by and dreaming of it someday falling into my lap, but with intentionality, it's the creation of the end results that I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
And each decision being integral to the creation of it so that it comes out exactly like I'm hoping.
Yeah.
And you can't have it come out exactly like you're hoping unless you take time to think about each one of those details and to create, and like the movie, to create the soundtrack that goes with particular moments, to set the scene, or to angle the camera in a certain way. All of those intentional decisions serve to create one complete story, one complete end result. And I think in our lives, the more detailed intentionality we can include, the more likely we are to achieve that kind of final product that we're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, I think that captures it really well, because in the end you'll see something so big, something so impressive, something so satisfying too, when you've done that in a way that's so intentional that all those things add up together to be your life, I suppose, to make this really big, satisfying thing.
That's beautiful. Well, I think we've probably talked enough about intention, but if you have found this conversation useful, if you feel like somebody that could benefit from thinking about the idea of hope as intention, please feel free to share it with them. We do this with the hope that we can make a difference, that things will be better for more people. And we can only achieve our hope if you share it with other people who you think might benefit from it. But until next time, go be intentional about how you develop hope.